Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to what is the fifth in our series of webinars, which means we're 5 months deep into this. Our first webinar was with Rita Siri. For those of you that attended, Rita Siri is a researcher at Queen's University in Belfast doing a PhD in equine assisted services funded by the Department of Agriculture. And she's looking at, amongst other things, sort of practitioner experience and the landscape for practitioners in Northern Ireland. So it's really fitting and very exciting to welcome Kezia Sullivan and Professor Anne Hemingway this evening from Bournemouth University. Some of you may well have met Kezia before. She's attended a couple of our events and spoke briefly at our last workshop, the CAFRA workshop, around research and engaging in research and what she's doing. But it was such a sort of a 5-minute touchstone on what she's up to that we felt it would be appropriate, if we could, to bring her on here and talk a little bit more about it. And it's brilliant that she's joined by Professor Anne Hemingway, who I understand, Kezia, you work very closely with at the University of Bournemouth, and you're from the public health and wellbeing background. That's your doctorate's in, and looking sort of around social innovation and non-medicalised approaches to healthcare. So look, it is just wonderful to have you both with us this evening. The way we normally work these webinars is we do a sort of a 20-minute presentation from your side of things, and then a short discussion, and then open it for questions from the panel, from the floor, and practitioners who have attended. So Kezia, are you happy to kick off from your side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having us here. It's been lovely to meet some of you over the past few months. But for anybody I've not met yet, I'm Kezia Sullivan. I've been researching in equine-assisted services for the last few years. And yeah, as Molly mentioned, working with Professor Anne Hemingway. So thank you so much for joining us as well. Anne, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself a bit, and I'll bring up the slides.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Anne Hemingway. I'm a professor of public health and wellbeing in England, and my interest really is in long-term interest has been in behaviour change. It's a long time since I did my doctorate, which was at University of Southampton. But at that point, I was still interested, still looking at behaviour change. But over the last 10 years, I'm more interested in embodied interventions that achieve behaviour change. Focusing particularly on equine-assisted services, and have published a variety of papers which are all freely available online, and I'm now working with a range of charities with Kez to look more broadly and try and make sense of what's happening across providers in the sector to see what the key outcomes are for equine assisted services, and also very interested in the mechanism of action of equine assisted services as well.
Thanks, Anne. So yeah, we've been working together, and I thought maybe building on the conversations at CAFRA that we had last time, it might be useful to kind of take a quick run through some of the statistical and qualitative findings that we've had, to kind of say, okay, well, what can we find out through research? And then go a bit deeper into actually, well, what is research and what can it mean for different equine-assisted organisations? And then how can you engage with that, and how can you do your own where relevant and helpful? So some of the statistical findings that we've had have been really, well, they've surprised me. So we've had findings like the horse course reducing domestic violence by 51% at a 1-year follow-up. And that's showing a preventative impact of an equine assisted service on domestic violence. And that's known to be really hard to prevent. So that was carried out using local authorities' data. So we didn't actually go to the participants at all. It was all completely anonymous and one step removed. We also found that family cohesion was significantly improved in a very short intervention. And that data was from a family reflection session. So that really added to sessions. Families were able to set goals and think about how they might move forward. And then we also found that the same course as the domestic violence study, the horse course, significantly improved sociocognitive skills for over 70 different referral reasons. So this again was not data we gathered by bothering the participants. This data was just collected in the run of the program and then sent to us. And we found that equine assisted services worked for a really broad range of participants with all different kinds of needs. So some people were disengaged with school and very angry and struggling. And other people had, for example, interpersonal difficulties or situations beyond their control. But it's hoped that by improving sociocognitive skills, it will at least give people a way through the circumstances that they might find themselves in. And something I'd like to call out about these findings is that they're very visual. They're very obviously visible. The line goes up, you can see them. So they're good for when you need to maybe communicate with someone who doesn't have a lot of time to invest emotionally or to really consider all the different ways that equine assisted services can play out. But they just need to know, does it work? Yes, no. How much does it work? How well? In kind of very clear images. Then looking into qualitative findings that we've had, these are a bit broader and more varied, and also they tend towards the emotional. So, for example, one intervention helped children learn how to feel safe to be themselves and regulate their emotions. And I love the bottom quote on this one, where somebody's parent fed back that she used her confidence to ask for personal space on a family outing. Because if you track that through other circumstances where that kind of ability isn't available to a participant, then you can end up with trouble like aggression or like isolation because they don't feel safe to be around their families, when really they just need the communication skills. So these are some really diverse ways that equine assisted services can help people that it's absolutely appropriate to find out through story data. Another organisation had some operational findings. So they actually...
Kez, sorry to interrupt. Is everyone else, are your slides moving as Kez is speaking, or are they still?
No.
Are they not?
Yeah, sorry, no, they're just still on the first, yeah.
Oh no. Thanks for interrupting. Have they moved now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that again, but please do interrupt all the time if that's going on, and hopefully it'll resolve.
Thank you.
So they're visible now, we're all set?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so this middle column here, they found an operational implication through carrying out a bit of research, which was that when they introduced a new program, actually they needed to increase their capacity before doing that. They couldn't just add the program on top of their regular workload because the horses got less engaged. So here we had a well-being implication for the horses involved through qualitative research, and we wouldn't have found that out without talking with the facilitators, who of course are on the ground seeing what's happening on a daily basis. And then the final piece was a really great collaborative piece across about 20 organisations, I think, in the southwest of England. And if anybody watching this operates over there, definitely get in touch with the Southwest practitioners. They're a really wonderful group with lots of expertise. And they found over 88 different outcomes across 7 themes. So these included emotional skills, well-being, learning relationship skills. And because we could pull that information, no 2 practitioners necessarily use the same language, but by gathering that information and kind of compiling it, then we can make it really clear what equine assisted services are offering to participants really consistently. So does anybody have any questions on that so far? No. Okay, and if I do this, has the screen changed?
No.
Also no. Oh no. Okay.
Oh, it has changed now, Kaz. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
has. Okay,
it's
this is
changed.
gonna be an adventure. How is this? Has this come up with a thing that says what is research and then some wet text in orange?
No text in orange yet.
Text in orange.
There's
Orange,
text
yeah.
in orange yet.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both of you, for helping. I'm just going to keep referring, I think.
No problem.
So I'll try and do this with a minimum of slide changes. Do you now have orange and blue?
Yeah.
Good. So when we talk about research, I have to be completely honest that I did a whole psychology degree, and then still when somebody asked me what is research, I would have to think about it quite hard. So I thought it'd be handy to just kind of get it down in orange and blue. So research is defined as the systematic effort to discover or confirm facts. And I think the phrase "or confirm" is really important here, because equine assisted services professionals see the outcomes every day and are quite rightly absolutely sure that, you know, these clients are improving in confidence, or these clients are improving communication skills. But there's a piece there where we can also go and confirm it and then make that information available publicly so that it can be used by people who maybe aren't on the ground with the horses and clients. So, for example, to talk to referrers. And another way that research can be used is to understand relationships among variables. And that's when we get into models. And down here we have one hell of a sentence. Models are schematic representations of reality. And that's about creating a view of the world to make predictions. And again, this didn't really hit home for me until I was at a conference and somebody said the beautiful phrase, "You don't need a model to make a cup of tea." And I found that so useful, because my little brain started worrying and it went, yeah, you do. We just don't think about it very often.
Yeah.
So, for example, some of the things that we might use, some of the assumptions we might use in making a cup of tea are things like, if I turn the tap on, water will be available and kettles will heat the water up. And if they don't, we know where to stop to go back and check our assumptions and go back and debug. So, you know, if the kettle isn't heating the water up, we're not still looking at the tap. And we can then start to look at possible solutions. So, for example, did I forget to turn it on? And if we think about this in terms of equine assisted services, we might come up with things like, if somebody sends somebody with anxiety to you and says, oh, they came to a service, but it didn't work. Well, you can start to ask questions and say, okay, well, how long did they come here for? And if it was 20 minutes once, we know that that might not be enough time. So it's not that equine assisted services always work, they work under these conditions. And then we can make sure that we're providing those conditions so that they work really well for everybody who attends. So if we get a bit more precise about how we can use that for equine assisted services, and do stop me if the slides aren't coming along with me.
Oh, they are. You're good.
So then we can start to interrogate these general statements like, my equine assisted service works really well. And it's really likely that it does. And to be honest, when people ask me how, you know, do equine assisted services work, I just say, yes, you know, yeah, they work great. Because there's so much information that you don't always want to bombard people with it. But the thing is, when you're talking to referrers, for example, they probably want all the information. You probably can't give them too much in some respects. So it can help to get really precise, and that's where models can come in. So you can have things like, what are your clients' needs? Maybe it's reducing anxiety. And how does the work you do develop your clients' abilities to do important things like regulating emotions? And then you can kind of hone in on this very precise statement until you're saying things like, my equine assisted service supports school attendance by helping clients learn to manage anxiety. which just spells it out a little bit more to make it clear what you're doing and who it's helping and how, and also later that it's definitely doing that, to make those funding and referring decisions easy and to give people confidence that they are for sure coming to the right service for them. So, for example, some services will absolutely excel in helping people learn to manage anxiety, and other services might do a really good job of life skills. And there's often heavy overlap in that, but for sure there's still room for specialization. So looking a little bit then at the types of research activities you can get involved with, there are essentially three that we work with quite commonly. The first being research. So that's finding new knowledge, perspectives, or ways of gaining knowledge. We also look at outcomes measurement. So that's more specific to your service with your clients and your methods. So it won't always be brand new, but it will confirm what you're achieving. And it will be able to give people some idea of the extent and the timescales and things like that. And then there's service evaluation, which is for answering more specific questions. So just to dig a little bit deeper into these, first we have research. And in this diagram, if you imagine that the full black line circle is all scientific knowledge to date, whenever we do research, we're pushing the edge of that circle out just a little bit. So we go after the unknown to bring back the new news. And this I have actually nicked from Anne, this diagram. So I think we call it collaborating. So qualitative, I've highlighted in green at the bottom because it's absolutely the foundation of any quantitative research. So we need that story data down at the bottom to then tell us what to look into, because people use all different words around somebody, for example, building confidence, until eventually we'll kind of come to this point and we'll say, well, everyone seems to be talking about the same construct. And then we can look at a measure to confirm what we're seeing anecdotally. So, for example, the domestic violence study comes in at a cohort study, which is just a very large before and after kind of a study. And Anne, I don't know whether you want to say anything else about this.
Yeah, I mean, the hierarchy of evidence is used in healthcare a lot to underpin new interventions, the evaluation of new interventions. And basically you're moving from where you're getting insights from people right at the bottom, brightest green, who are either providing an intervention or using an intervention. And then above that, the qualitative studies, the interviews, observations, and you'd really ideally want those to be done by someone independent. And you need to start getting into thinking about how you can be very researcher friendly and student friendly. So as you can start to expose your intervention to people from outside to look at effectiveness. Because obviously for commissioners, it's that much more independent and robust if someone's done it who's not engaged in providing the service. The before and after measures are great, and as Kez mentioned, you can have those you can have them done by your participants, which is great and gives you a lot of information. But if you get referrals from elsewhere, then you can also have them before and after measures done, completed by the referrer, which again is somewhat more robust because it's a new pair of eyes looking rather than the participant or the participant's carer or parents or a member of your team or whatever. If it's a referrer, it's slightly more independent. The domestic violence study was a cohort study where we got to compare 4 different big groups. So the overall sample was around 13,000. So mathematically, that gives you quite a lot of strength in terms of your findings. And the very strongest mathematical findings are through randomization to treatment, which is the top of the triangle. And this is, in our experience, somewhat hard to achieve with equine assisted. in that you often don't have any comparable treatments or interventions to compare with, if that makes sense. And some of the providers we're working with in England are reporting that their services are used often when other services aren't working or people won't attend them. So there is some difficulty in terms of getting comparison groups to do that. But what you essentially need to do is then randomly assign people to an equine assisted or another treatment or service, and then compare the outcomes across. So we're kind of getting there with equine assisted, but many of the studies are very small numbers, and the statistical analysis of needs bigger numbers to be strong and powerful enough to show an effect size effectively. And you're basically trying to look at over 100 participants normally to do that. Thanks, Kez.
Thanks for that, Anne. Really, really helpful. Yeah, as Anne mentioned, around here, this kind of darker blue segment, we've got before and after measurements, and that's where we can get into outcome. So outcome measurement is something that comes up a lot, especially at places like CAFRE, for example. It can be research if, for example, we're finding out something new, or it can be part of evaluation where you can be checking what you're providing and the information to communicate really clearly about what you're providing. And the outcomes measurement is that it's specific to your service. So, for example, you might think about what your clients need, and then services designed to provide that, and then how you can measure that. So whether that's confidence or whether that's engagement at school, you know what you're aiming for, how you're achieving it, and whether you're achieving it. So it feeds into service evaluation, which answers far more specific questions around your service and can answer quite a broad range of questions, because service evaluation is really more for you as a service. So, for example, it might include some research and outcomes measurement, but then you also might interview stakeholders. And stakeholders can be anyone. So it could be a parent, it could be your facilitators, it can be quite simple. It could even be testimonials, for example. And it gives a more holistic view of services. So within service evaluation, it's quite commonly used during times of change. So, for example, if you're piloting a new program that you might have introduced, or if you've gone and done a qualification and you've tweaked some of the ways that you offer your service, then you might want to evaluate your service kind of before, during, and after to say, okay, well, have we achieved what we wanted to achieve? And has this process gone well or not? So, Anne, is there anything else you'd like to add about service evaluation?
No, I don't think so. I think you've covered it. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, those are the three main types. And here I've got a big old slide about them. So I'll just go through this part at the end, which applies to all of them. And I really want to make the point that whichever one of these you end up doing, or whichever combination, it must be carried out ethically. And this is with particular consideration for vulnerable participant groups. So I'm sure you all have this in your services, where people are being referred to you because they can't go elsewhere or because they struggle in other settings. So it's really important that their taking part in your service is never contingent on consenting to do research or on giving feedback, for example. And as well, it's important that questions are not triggering. So we always try and use positively phrased questions. So maybe using a resilience scale rather than a trauma scale, for example. And as well, this can help any activities that you're doing to enhance or at least have a neutral impact on participant experience. We also do a lot of what's called secondary data analysis, which Anne touched on, where, for example, referrers will send the information to us rather than us go and bother the participants about it, or, you know, add a new form to the lives of people who maybe have enough forms already. So there are all kinds of considerations when you're starting to do this kind of thing, and they'll vary so much with every service. So it's just important that you check through and think, well, is there any chance that this will be adding difficulty for my clients, and how can I mitigate that, or maybe not, maybe come to the information a different way. Sorry. The other thing about all of these is that they can be used for developing your own knowledge about your service and for communicating your impact with others. The main differences between them, I guess, is that research is usually for telling everybody. Research is for kind of making that wealth of experience within the industry public, because something I really love about equine-assisted services, particularly at the moment, is that there are so many different practitioners working in different ways for different participant needs, and really achieving these staggering results for people, really helping people in their lives through all of these wonderful methods that they've come up with. And we just don't know yet quite what all of them might be. So there's really fantastic diversity and expertise in the equine-assisted services. And my goal, certainly with the research, is to bring that knowledge and that expertise and those results forward to where everybody can see them if they look. So actually, the reason that I came into researching equine-assisted services was I saw a statistic. That's how you know I'm a geek. I saw a statistic 12 years ago, and it was that a program in prisons, a Mustang training program, halved the rate of reoffending from 66 to 33%. And I read that statistic in like a news article, and I thought, oh my God, that's amazing. We've fixed it, you know? And I thought, wow, that's great. This must be in use everywhere. And then when I went looking, not only was it not in use everywhere, but also that statistic wasn't reflected in the academic literature. It was just in this one news article. So when I came to wanting to share that information, it was hard to share it with people who wanted it, you know, signed and sealed and printed and peer reviewed. And there's absolutely a place for that, because we do want to make sure that we're absolutely correct when we're talking about our services' efficacy. But yeah, it can be a barrier to communicating. So that's my aim with this, is to break that down, to bring the expertise and the results into practice and make it accessible to people. Then within outcomes evaluation, this is really kind of at the smallest scale. This can just be for your own notes. This is for you to know what your service is achieving and with who. And you can use it to optimize your service and ensure high quality delivery, but then you can also use it to inform research. So I'd say if you're doing outcomes evaluation, it's probably a good idea to add a research consent section somewhere, so that potentially you can share that information later if people have consented anonymously to do research, for example, if you've built up a big enough bank of data at that point. So outcomes evaluation can feed into research and also feed into service evaluation. So, you know, that's the optimize your service piece, where you can say, okay, well, what else can we offer? What are the opportunities here, and who are we most effective for, and how can we reach them? That kind of thing. So that's more holistic. And then finally, I'm just going to run through a kind of typical workflow, because I think sometimes research can be a bit opaque. So we were approached by a service provider who said, I'm launching a pilot program. Can you help me evaluate it? So we did. And the first question really was, what is the program trying to achieve? What are you aiming for, and who's coming? And then Anne and I went and researched measurement tools to find the most specific and user-friendly ones. and we went back to the provider and actually collaborated on choosing the tools. So we went back with a big range and said, okay, is this one kind of what you're going for? And do you think people will fill this one out? And actually had a discussion about it. And that was quite iterative. So we didn't just show up and say, you must use this. It was very much conversational. And once the provider had chosen the tools that they felt were the most appropriate for their service, which, by the way, were not the ones I thought would be the most useful, but they knew their service better than I did, right? Like, it's not my role to come in and say it's this. They then put that into a facilitator pack and a referrer pack, ran the intervention, and then sent us the anonymized data for analysis. And from this, we were able to generate a report and workshop on how their program had gone, as well as a funder report to say the program went pretty well, and also publish it as research in the HETI journal and present it at HETI so that other people in the equine assisted services can use that information. So this was a really lovely example of something which was service evaluation and outcome measurement and research all at once. So they overlap quite often. And that's all I have, unless Anne, you'd like to add anything. We're down to the thank you slide.
No, that's great. Thanks, Kez.
Okay, does anybody have any questions at all? It's a bit of an information barrage.
No, I was just thank you both for that. I was just going to sort of dive in around the idea of diversity and expertise and everyone needing to see results and research where they need to see it. And I guess one of the barriers we've seen here is around data capture, both in terms of the methods that practitioners are using, and also then in recognised methodologies within trusts or within different charities. And how do you pre-plan for that? I mean, I suppose it sits a wee bit with referral forms as well, but the idea that if you can capture data in a way as a practitioner that is easily read across by trusts and researchers, then obviously it kind of helps speed up this research process on the other end of things. And is there kind of a best practice way that you look at that, or is it very specific to each modality of practice, or what way have you kind of dealt with that?
Well, when you think of your service, you have people referred. So the first thing to do is to know who's being referred. So organize your referral system with a form that gives you the information that you need, in terms of what the issues are that people are coming to you with. So that would be the first one.
Yeah.
Then map or make sense of your intervention in a way that can be explained easily to others. So and you can do that with your own staff. What's the overall aim of your intervention, and how do you actually normally deliver it? And realize that anyone who wants to send someone to you or learn about your intervention also wants to know that you're safe and that you're complying with all health and safety regulations. And also that you're looking after your horses properly. So the horse's welfare is just as important as the participants' welfare. So again, consider what's best evidence on how to keep horses, and how you can organize that and express it in a way that other people can understand. Because increasingly, the discussions about social contract in relation to horses and equine activities is becoming much more important, and we all need to be very transparent about how we're doing things. So you've kind of collected information on what you're doing and who you're being sent, okay? And then you want to think about what you're achieving. And so that will require you to talk to each other. And as Kez said, to your stakeholders, to your users, to your referrers, commissioners, etc. So what outcomes are people seeing? What's happening? Why are they sending people back to you? What are the changes that they're seeing? And once you have that, then you can begin to get ideas about how you can measure that on an ongoing basis. And there are validated tools for quite a lot of the outcomes, but there may not be something specifically that exactly fits what you're doing, because it's an emerging area of study, and we're not really at that point yet. But there are various tools that you can use once you get some idea of what it is that you're actually achieving.
Yeah.
And then you can agree with everyone. You know, you can agree your referral form, you can agree your evaluation process. And then I would argue you need probably to have a member of staff who's interested in you know, collecting information and doing things, and be very nice to them, so they will help you to create, you know, a record of what's happening, and share it with your commissioners, etc. So it's kind of a journey map, if you like, right the way through. But it is important to show that you are being effective. And it is important to listen at the beginning to try and find out what your particular USP might be. I mean, we're getting to the stage where people are using similar models, I think, in terms of equine assisted. So you would expect, you don't have to, when you set up a new service for hip replacements, you don't have to prove that hip replacements work when you set up the service, because there's already a body of evidence saying they do. We're not quite at that stage with equine assisted services yet, but there is beginning to be emerging models which are more well evaluated and effective, and therefore funded by statutory organisations, often emerging. So that's an important note to add as well. Because if you're doing the same as another service, and the other service is pretty well evaluated, then, you know, how much effort does it take to make what you do pretty much the same as them, and then you can use the same research that already exists for their service, provided you're providing it in the same way.
Yeah.
Does that help?
It does, yeah, no, very much so. So I'm conscious there's a couple of questions in the chat here. Let me see. David, did you have a question? David Doyle, did you have a question for Kez?
Yes. Hi, David. nice to know you're about.
No. Does anyone else have any questions at the moment, or yeah, go ahead. Ruth, would you like to go ahead there?
No, just to say, you know, Kez, thanks for the overview, and just to kind of reiterate how important the research is when we're all looking for funding. You know, funding is so tight when you go to the statutory bodies, and it helps so much when the research is there. So, you know, look forward to linking in with you again later on that. You know,
for sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
for sure.
Thanks, David. Ruth, did you have a question there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Can you hear
absolutely.
me? Yeah, sorry, I just got a wee note that says my camera isn't working for some reason, so I apologise about that. I tried to switch it on. That was absolutely brilliant, Kez. Thank you very much. Really, really good to hear. And along with Professor Hemingway as well, the research that's going on. I'm coming from a slightly different angle. I'm a few steps behind. I'm trying to persuade a health trust that it is worth asking for internal transfer of Department of Health retained estate that is currently vacant, for the purposes of not using statutory funding, for the purposes of setting up an equine assisted therapy organisation. So it's a few steps behind, but trying to persuade a big health trust that it's the right thing to do is difficult. And obviously the best research that's out there, and the cohort studies or whatever is there, and it's not looking for statutory funding, it's just looking to not let the 70 acres in South Belfast that's had horses living and working on it for 30 years go into the disposal process. It's to try and hold on until the equine strategy, the DAERA equine strategy, is complete, on which I understand, I've heard from the lead from that group, from the equine assisted therapy and learning part of that group, that the Department of Health pilot studies have gone extremely well. No surprise there, but obviously they need their evidence themselves. So it's just about trying to persuade a health trust. So basically my question is, do you have any infographics for busy chief executives and busy co-directors to actually see, look, this is coming. It is really worth putting your penny in there, not even a penny, just putting your foot in and discussing a transfer of the land.
So that's a really good question. And I'm now suddenly thinking I must get an infographic. Firstly, I think you're doing a fantastic thing. And that's half the reason I got into this, was to prove to a local council in London that we do need equestrian land because it has all these benefits. It can be very uphill. Anne and I have some papers published, and there are a lot of papers out there that are not by Anne and I that are also excellent. Like, do get those. In terms of infographics, if you get in touch with me, I can send you some of the charts that we have and some of the sources for those, which might work. Anne, I don't know whether you actually have any infographics.
No, not really, but I mean, it would be easy enough to put that together, and also to look at we are in the process of looking at the literature at the moment in terms of what's out there, but specifically for equine assisted. But in reality, I would also say it will pay to find out what their biggest anxiety points are in terms of their health services, where the pinch points are. In England, the child and adolescent mental health services are not really working. So that's where the equine assisted services have made big strides, is by being able to engage children and families who won't engage with anything else, and are also causing problems and expense for services in the long run, which they don't want to have. So if they feel particularly overwhelmed in an area which is relevant for equine assisted, then it might be worthwhile just considering where equine assisted is already making inroads in other places, and one of those is with what was the Troubled Families Programme in England, now Supporting Families funding, where local authorities collect data on families with multiple problems and maybe have a little of extra funding to spend on supporting those families. That's one example where equine assisted services are really getting their feet under the table in England, because we started to do the research which is showing the benefits, of those families engaging.
And if it is mental health, we have a chapter online, which I will send to Molly after this, that runs through all the evidence for that. So it's not quite an infographic, but it is all in one place.
Brilliant. That would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Hazel, did you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Kezia. Thanks very much. And for that presentation, it was brilliant. I actually wrote my question down there, so it's sort of sitting on the screen. We were sort of looking at evaluation tools and standardized assessments and something, because we were trying to get a broad, I suppose, the more evidence base collated, but we were trying to look at a standardized tool. And I wondered, across all the work you're doing, is there any common measures or tools you know of that people are using?
Well, it really depends on what their outcomes are. If it's for mental health and behavioural issues in a broad sense,
yes,
then the SDQ is really useful, the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, which is validated across a lot of different age groups and for users and for parents and for professionals. There's different versions, and it's available, and it is framed because, as Kez said, another thing you've got to watch is we're often working with very vulnerable individuals and families. One is a questionnaire that sort of says, how suicidal are you feeling today, and all this sort of stuff, or anything that's too long because it's inappropriate, puts people off. filling it out, and often acknowledging that people, maybe their reading and writing isn't their greatest strength. So, you know, the SDQ is short and it's accessible, and it is recommended as an evaluation tool for child and adolescent mental health services anyway.
Okay.
For the, you know, for the statutory services.
Yeah.
So if you could show that you're making, you know, you're making some changes with that tool, then you'll get people's attention.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
But it really depends again on what your equine assisted is aiming to do. You know, if it is about those kind of emotional management skills and interacting with others and relationships and education and various things, then it probably will fit. Less so if it's around neurodiversity, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is where it's worth actually having, if you have referrers, it's worth having the conversation with your referrers and saying, well, what do you hope that they achieve? And there can actually be quite a bit of pre-work before you select an outcome measure to say, okay, well, what do my referrers want? What are we best at? What do my clients want? And then you kind of draw it all together, and then there'll be maybe 5 or 6 different ways of measuring that out in the literature. I mean, there's probably 200, but there'll be 5 or 6 common ones. Yeah. And then of those, you can lay them out flat and say, okay, well, definitely not that one, but this one here is quite close. Yeah. Sometimes there'll be components of larger ones as well, so it might be too long, but you can crop it down to the relevant section. And maybe it's not completely validated on its own, but for the purposes you're using it for, it still has credibility when you're talking to whoever it is that you're talking to. So it's going to be completely situation dependent.
Yeah, and we have seen quite a lot of that actually with practitioners here, particularly who have been in practice for, you know, substantial amount of time, where they've almost crafted their own kind of outcome measurement based around other things, but through their experience they understand what works and what doesn't work, you know, with each groups and what is relevant for funders and different things. And it's kind of a fascinating piece of its own as well, just that one, yeah, one evaluation piece. But sorry, okay, we've got 3 more hands. Robert, Hoy, have you got a question, Robert?
Hope I'm working. Thanks, Kezia. You've got me some way along a problem that I've been trying to cope with. My own head is trying to evaluate research and evidence within it, and your hierarchy helps me with that. I come from a veterinary background, and I'm used to well-controlled studies that allow you to come at a research. And when I started my research, my trying to learn about this stuff, I must have read maybe even hundreds of articles before I could find something that I could find as something that I would call research rather than a story. And your hierarchy helps me with that. What Ruth was talking about is very strong in Northern Ireland because we got no money in our health service, and the commissioners are very loath to do anything strange or new or innovative. Strangely, you think they would want to do it at a time like that, but they want to do something that's been done before. So there's a real need for evidence and numbers. But really the question is around trying to define the problem that you're trying to solve, because if you're dealing with a cohort of school children, say, that are labelled as having an anxiety issue, the cause behind that is so varied. How can you do any comparison studies on that at all when what's going on behind is likely to be so different across a class of children? You could say that there's a problem with anxiety within the class, but how do you ever start to do anything other than an outcome type write-up on that sort of a situation? Help?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I know what you mean. So the study we had up in the front about the 70 different referral reasons, there are so many different reasons that someone can be experiencing anxiety, and some of those are within the person and some of those within the family, within the school, within society. But the thing that Anne and I are finding, and I'm sure Anne will say more about this in a minute, we're finding that equine assisted services as a rule are improving emotional regulation, which is giving people a lever to whatever the cause of the anxiety, it's giving people a lever to cope. So it's giving them some degree of resilience within a situation that might be really difficult to stay, to not be anxious in. So it's not that people won't be faced with anxiety-provoking situations or circumstances for sure, but they'll be able to come back and get kind of get centered again. So that's broadly what that would be my answer, I suppose. Anne, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, the work we've done with the horse course, we just analysed about 570 something before and after measures. I mean, how it's done in healthcare, and from with my public health hat on, you do bigger numbers. So I know in veterinary studies often you haven't got very big numbers, particularly in equine studies, because there may not be a mass of horses to actually study something in exactly the same way on. I know it's an issue other vets have told me. But in public health, what we tend to do is we look at bigger numbers, because the bigger numbers you have, the less likely you are to be looking at something that's happened, changes that have happened by accident, if you like. But out of those 500 and whatever participants, with all these different reasons for referral, there's some really consistent things that they achieve. And one of them, a key one, is calmness, which is why it relates so well to people being referred with anxiety. And as Kez said, we've done also a little pilot study only so far. We've done 10 people interacting with a horse, and we've collected their psychophysiological measures, so heart rate variability and skin conductivity response. And then we've done another 10 people with electroencephalogram while they're interacting with the horse. So that's brain activity essentially while they're interacting with the horse, with mobile EEG. And the key thing that's come out of all of that is that people experience emotional arousal when they're interacting with horses, particularly when it's a new thing. For those of us who've been doing it a very long time, maybe, not so much. But for people who referred and they come and it's pretty new, or the way they're interacting with the horse is new and the environment's new and everything, they do experience emotional arousal. And we don't know from the psychophys measures and the EEG, we don't know why they're experiencing emotional arousal. So we have to video and we have to analyze the data alongside the video to see exactly what's happening. But it's fairly consistent. And we hypothesize, and it is only a hypothesis, we haven't properly tested it yet, that through experiencing emotional arousal in a safe environment and being coached to success with the horses, it can shift their behavior in terms of someone who maybe get very anxious and shut down, or become aggressive, or run away, or whatever it is, the way that they cope with emotional arousal changes, because in that moment they want to be safe and they want to be successful, and they get coached to be assertive and consistent and calm for success, and then that seems to fix. And the calmness is really confirmed in over 80% of participants 2 months later. So they do their intervention, which is about, this particular one's about 10 hours in 4 or 5 slots, a couple of hours, and then but the calmness sticks. Does that make sense? So the referrer is still seeing a calmer individual 2 months later. So these are all, the calmness is definitely showing up really consistently in fairly big numbers now, despite the fact that there's a ton of different reasons for referral. The equine assisted service seems to spit people out at the other end who are calmer. Yeah. And exactly why that's happening, we're still looking at why it's happening. But in terms of the anxiety part of it, people are learning how to be calm, and they're motivated to be calm with the horses in a way that they're not for other types of interventions. I hope that kind of helps.
We've seen that with that health behaviour change, particularly in the EAL models with primary schools, which then lead, domino effect onto other things, and being able to work in the classroom, being able to work in larger groups, being able to do all that stuff. But it's that's key sort of health behavioural change has been phenomenal here in a number of projects that we've run. So I'm just conscious of time. And Sarah, have you got a question there for us?
Hi, yes, I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. I work for a charity, a veterans charity over here, and we're on our second course of equine assisted therapy, assisted learning, should I say. We're doing it in a group setting, and I'm just wondering what the sort of data collection is in the groups. Is it something that is just individual data that you're getting, or do you do group data as well? Is there a need for it?
Yeah, I mean, most of what we've done is more individual or in a family group, you know, so we have done family groups. But I think the published literature, I would say it's probably more, there's less on group interventions.
Yeah.
But of course, if you're going to evaluate that, you also need to be looking at that group interaction element as well, you know, which can be very helpful, or for some people not so helpful. So.
Yeah.
But it's another variable that needs considering when you're doing your evaluations.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to get as much information as I can to push the course, because I'm just a horse mad person. So the more people who can benefit from it, the better. I know how powerful it is. We can see it firsthand with the clients that we've got with PTSD, with anxiety, all of that. And it's where I can find this data to pass it on to my boss to get the funding for it, really, to keep the courses going. Because we're doing groups of 8, but we're also doing individual for people who, as you quite rightly said, don't want to do group. They can't come to group.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple like that, but then others are really benefiting from the group. So
yeah, I mean, there is some papers if you want to email. I don't know if our emails are on the slides, are they, Kezia?
We'll send it out with the recording.
Yeah,
if you're happy enough,
because there is a couple of nice papers on veterans and PTSD from America and equine assisted, which might be helpful.
that'd be lovely.
And
Thank you.
Sarah, are you based in Northern Ireland, or are you in England? Northern Ireland, yeah, because there's some data as well around, because obviously there's a sort of Northern Ireland element to veterans as well, and there's a few bits that need to be taken into consideration there as well, which there are certainly some data and research that we can probably help you with as well, just of one equine, so we'll pass that on to you as well.
Thank you.
No worries. Michael, have you got a question there? Sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Molly, for popping on this training tonight, and for Kez for the wonderful slideshow, and to Professor Hemingway, especially where you established and quite rightly noted that to establish a safe environment surely leads to building participants' confidence, which leads to improving their health and well-being. So that is priority. Thank you. Very interested to listen to the facts in the first couple of slides about the 88 different positives or 70 referrals, different numbers pushed out, which is, we all know the benefits that this equine assisted services bring. To quantify and to qualify that data, has the local authority that provided the positive feedback got a set criteria that assisted providers have to meet to say it's a positive or a negative, instead of just the health and well-being of the participant is improved? Is there such a criteria that measures the success?
Yeah. The for the DV, the domestic violence paper, and hopefully we're just getting our sticky fingers on some more data from that local authority as well. But they look at the hard data points, or hard-ish data points, every 3 months with the families. There's multidisciplinary conference data and notes about what's been happening in the family. There's social worker data about what's been happening in the family. There's crime data about whether the police have been called out or anyone's been arrested or cautioned or whatever in the family. And there's mental health data. and it's collected every 3 months by the local authority. So basically you have this data set that's sitting there on the supported families programme on many thousands of families, and you can ask for portions of that which relate to particular charities and their work, or organisations and their work, which is what we did to look very specifically about the impact that they're having. But if a charity or an intervention is working, it should be getting paid for its services through that system. That's how you know in England that it's working, essentially. And the charities go, oh, we started to get paid for this, so we must be, there's an impact after we've had the person or the family or whatever in our services, and they start to get paid. So that's kind of from the local authority data position, how it's been working with equine assisted in England. I don't know if you have supported families or troubled families in Ireland, or whether it's a different setup.
We have something similar in Wales, and to get this off the ground would be wonderful, but it is just if we had evidence of some sort of criteria to meet that local authority, because as everybody's saying here tonight, and I know that people are up against local authority funding, and if it was a cross-board criteria to meet, the data will suggest everything is very positive coming out of this work, but some sort of criteria to go along to a local authority to say we know what's working, and but if it was measured against some sort of criteria to measure the success, that sometimes help. My second question is, a lot of the data was based on a lot of the positives, and you know, doing a master's myself, we know about the empirical evidence that's required. What about the things that haven't worked? Why hasn't the interventions worked? Is there any evidence to back that up, Kez? What's not quite happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So quite often, the first thing is low participant numbers. We just, you know, if you get 10 people, for example, the statistics just don't work on that really. So far, I haven't had any programs that just flat don't work. I've had one come back with a pattern that was a bit unexpected. They went up and then they went down slightly. So I'm still kind of talking to them about that, but it was one where, you know, it was a really significant improvement and then it tailed off. So then we're into talking about how best to optimize the service and maybe doing a longer term to see, you know, does it go up again? Is it just normal noise in the data? And this is something that Anne touched on earlier, actually, is that, and I didn't have time to go into today, was the idea, and you're doing a master's, you'll absolutely know this, but for anybody who's listening and interested, data can be really noisy. And what that means is there are lots of fluctuations just as a result of chance. And that's why we do the statistics. And the way that I would kind of outline this is that, for example, in the domestic violence study, where there was a 51% decrease, in another parallel universe where everything is the same but chance is at play, it wasn't 51%, it was 55%. And in a different parallel universe, it was 46% and another 52%. And it's, you know, it's kind of like about here, but it's quite difficult to say like 51%. So that's what we found in ours. But the finding, and that's the thing that we communicate, is 51%, because it's immediately readable by anybody, kind of thing. But when we're writing for academic literature, or when we're writing in a different context, we use statistical significance, because that has kind of equations in it to cancel out the role of chance and say, whatever the exact amount is, it significantly decreased. Like, there was an effect. It may have been 36, it may have been 41, it may, you know, like, it kind of smooths out that variation that just happens in the natural world, right? It's like the size of a leaf on a tree.
But you're, with statistical analysis, you're trying to see whether something would have happened anyway by chance, basically, and the mathematics, the statistical analysis programs will show you whether there is a possibility that it could have happened anyway, or whether it's happened because of something, you know, and then your intervention is the something. And there's always a margin of error, which is what Kes is referring to. So, you know, it could be this or it could be that. And mostly with health and social care interventions, the smaller the numbers in the sample, the bigger the margin for error, which is what makes the smaller samples very difficult and hard to convince people with, if that makes sense.
Without
Which
a doubt.
is
Sorry.
sorry, go ahead, Michael.
What I was hoping that would come out of some sort of research going forward is that we have so many people providing or trying to provide the service, but provide poor services. And whether or not there was any quantifiable data that would show that with a qualification, with an assisted therapy or services qualification, that would make it more valuable for people to gain that qualification, to sort of underwrite the poor practices. And unfortunately, when people see that they can get lottery money and all sorts of money on the back of this service, where we want to provide a service that is safe. So that, I think, you know, if there was data to back that sort of information up, I think in the future that might help. And I'm just putting it out there to avoid the cowboys.
Yeah, I think qualifications are important, and there is a move afoot in you know, to provide some more standardized qualifications for people offering equine assisted. But equally, it's also about the way that you provide the qualities of your intervention and the way your intervention is organized as well, which is what I was saying about hip replacements. You know, you can't just get any old hip replacement, stick it in. You know, there's a very standardized way of doing it. Does that make sense? And we're not really there with equine assisted yet. There are some models which are emerging as having more evidence related to them. But we're not really there where we can say this is, if you're doing equine assisted, you need to do this to be effective. And we're just not there yet, unfortunately, with the evidence.
Yeah. And thank you. Does anyone else have a question before we close up? Sorry, I'm conscious we're well over time. I really appreciate Anne and Kez staying on to do this, but does anyone else have a final question?
There's a question in the chat I noticed. Is there any research coming through to show how much money can be saved in any areas of healthcare, e.g. preventing acute mental health admissions? Not that I know of, but it would be lovely to produce that, but not that I know of at the moment. Although, again, if you're taking referrals for those type of individuals, then it's you know, it would be really useful to kind of start mapping what happens with them, and start capturing you know, what the end point is and what the outcomes are, and if you can do follow-up and those kind of things. Because that's where people start to get really interested in saving money, you know. In that way. I mean, the domestic violence reduction, unfortunately, domestic violence is not all, this is me getting on my soapbox a bit, is not seen as that important. You know, we don't try to stop it, do we? All the interventions that are written about and tested are all about recovery. We don't seem to be, in our societies, seem to be really interested in preventing it, very sadly. But you know, but mental health issues are, particularly admissions to acute care, are very expensive. So if you are being referred people and then they're not finishing up going into hospital, if that makes sense, then it's really important to start trying to capture that data.
Yeah, and we've seen it certainly in the primary school models here as well, where you're breaking a cycle and children are staying more engaged in education, and then the opportunities that flow from that, and the social benefits and the health benefits that come from
and the follow-up you see for something like that might be really simple. It might be whether they're still in school.
Absolutely.
You know, and it might be as simple as getting someone to contact the school a few months later, just to say, you know, for each child to follow them up. and do
Sorry,
it routinely, you know, because that's a clear aim for the EAS, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
the EAS is aiming to help the children stay in school. So that's a really nice hard measure that you could capture routinely.
Yeah. Richard, sorry, if you got a question there, you're sort of spinning out slightly.
Just the one you're probably going to ask, Molly. Sorry to usurp you, but can we do a Rupert Isaacson on both of you? Kasia, this has been fantastic, but Rupert always ends his podcast with saying, "Will you come back?"
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Oh, I was actually going to do the opposite of that. I was going to say you've given us a lot this evening, guys, and I'm conscious, Kasia, you had mentioned about the CAMS project when we were at the CAFRA workshop, and is there anything, you know, projects that we're doing here that we can feed into you know, we can give back to you guys as well? Is there anything that's useful in your research or your ongoing work at the moment?
Oh, thank you for asking. I will have a think and a chat with Anne, and we'll definitely come through if there is. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always really helpful to hear kind of what issues people have and where you're at in terms of thinking about it in the sector, as it were. You know, it's really helpful for us because we're interested in doing studies which have a so what element to them, you know.
Yeah.
So they're relevant, you know, and important, and
Yeah.
and a lot of that is related to who you're getting referred.
You know, that would actually be really useful, is what is the next thing that we need to look at from your perspective, because you all probably know.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main things for me, particularly around the domestic violence, is that, you know, we get pilot projects going, and there've been a couple of really strong, really well evaluated pilot projects, but then they just don't get the traction to go again. And I don't know if that's to do with the research is needed, the evidence is needed, the funding is needed, or is it all of those, you know? But the more people we bring in on that conversation, then the better informed I guess we can be. Thank you so much, guys. Is there anything else just quickly before we wind it up? No, all good. Oh, brilliant. Look, guys, thank you so much. And if you're happy enough, we'll send your emails out with the recording, and hopefully not bombard you with too much stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Get in touch.
Okay. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah,
thank
you so much. Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.